In Dedham, Massachusetts, a courtroom brimming with tension and unresolved grief, Karen Read's retrial began, an explosive sequel to one of the most controversial cases in recent history. At the heart of it all lies the mysterious and brutal death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe, a man found lifeless in the snow outside of a fellow officer's home after a night of drinking in January of 2022. Prosecutors say Read, his girlfriend at the time, struck him with her SUV and left him to die. But Read fires back with a story far more sinister, alleging a cover-up involving a tight-knit circle of law enforcement, and claims that John was attacked inside the house and dumped outside. The first trial collapsed into mistrial, and now with new lead prosecutor Hank Brennan stepping in and a cast of over 150 potential witnesses set to take the stand, the retrial begins. Inside the courthouse, the battle lines are drawn with new arguments and some new evidence, while outside, crowds chant for justice. Tonight, we are live from the courthouse with all the big moments and best analysis from our trial insiders on day one of the Karen Read retrial. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. Great to have you aboard. What a day at Court TV. What a night it's going to be as we bring you the two huge stories. This hour, we're talking about the retrial of the century, which is really a search for the truth for what happened to Boston police officer John O'Keefe. Someone left him on a front yard to die in the cold. Was it his girlfriend Karen Read, or was it someone else, someone inside the house? That's what this jury has to determine. They've got to determine the truth. The first jury could not do that. The first jury did not do that. It was a hung jury. It was a mistrial. So now we start all over again as the family looks for justice, the family of John O'Keefe trying to figure out and understand what happened to their son, to their brother. Meanwhile, the family of Karen Read believing that she is 100% innocent. Everything is at stake in this trial, and everything is happening. Karen Read on trial again here. So this is the second time for her in 2 years. Last spring, this spring, back on trial. Prosecutors have charged her with second-degree murder. She loses this trial, she loses a good portion of her life, a good portion of the freedom for the rest of her life. So there's everything at stake for her. But also on trial again will be the Bryans, Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. These are the two third-party culprits that have been accused by the defense of actually being part of the conspiracy that killed John O'Keefe and then covered it up and then helped frame Karen Read. They went through this last year as well. They're going to go through it again. And it all began today with the opening statements. Now, the one thing about this case and this trial that makes it different than the rest, the game changers, the supporters of Karen Read. And this support are people who physically show up and people online, people who have donated money, people who have protested, people who have made their voices heard, believing that there are real problems in Canton and in Massachusetts. And they believe someone is being wrongfully convicted inside of a courthouse. And the reason this is different, I've said it countless times, but I'll say it again here on day one of the retrial. This doesn't happen. Accused murderers of police officers don't garner this type of support. It doesn't happen. This wasn't a case that was politically connected. This isn't a celebrity case. This was a case, the allegation is really a domestic case, a boyfriend and a girlfriend. Yet the community has latched onto it, And let me give you an idea of how much of a game changer it was. Last year in June, take a look at what it was like when Karen Read would show up at the courthouse.
Alan, what did you think about Brian Albert, Colin Albert, Jen McCabe showing up to court today with the O'Keefes?
Oh, I think it's a joke. I think they were doing it just for some sort of intimidation factor, probably for the jurors. It just plays into their countenance as bullies. That's all that was about. So,
Byron, what do you make of all this support?
Hey, Paul, fall back.
All right, that doesn't happen. This just doesn't happen in a murder trial where you're not talking about some celebrity or some social injustice, something that is politically motivated and there's groups mobilized ahead of time. That's not this case. Now, this is what the crowds looked like last June. Let's flash forward to today, day one of the retrial, Karen Read arriving at court.
Going into today?
You ready for the second round, Karen?
Victoria, how you doing?
Should be able to walk through, same as always, right?
Quite different, incredibly different. Now you see all that yellow tape up there? That's there for a reason, to keep people away. Let's bring in Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson joining us live from outside that courthouse in Dedham, Massachusetts. Matt, great to see you tonight. Let's start with the scene first, because this is a big part of the case that captured my attention and the attention of the nation. What was it like outside the courthouse today?
Yeah, and you're right. We have covered it since the very beginning, before the first trial even started. Now, when you were showing me with Karen Read walking through all of those supporters, that was just a block away from here. That was when she was leaving the courthouse, when her crowd would grow and grow and grow during verdict watch. And then today, she enters in through a different way. She doesn't go through the gauntlet of supporters like she did last year, because the buffer zone is expanded. It's actually 2 blocks away from the entrance of the courthouse. But you see the yellow tape and you see all of the barriers. That's what we saw last year. And we also see mass police here. They're enforcing it. It's not the court that enforces it. It's the state police. So that's what you're looking at when we're comparing and contrasting that. But still, nonetheless, her supporters were out here today, and there was about a couple dozen of them. They tend to grow as the trial moves forward. And again, we're expecting a long trial, something between 8 to 10 weeks for this retrial. And they were here because it was such a big day, obviously. Opening statements, and then we had key witnesses such as Kerry Roberts. And you know, they also were here to support John O'Keefe, because many people say that they are here for justice for John O'Keefe. So as court was ending for the day, the O'Keefe family made their way down the steps of the courthouse, and they don't usually talk to the media, but we wanted to, of course, give them the opportunity to remember the victim on such an important day. Take a listen.
Is there anything that you wanted to say so that we can focus on John?
Okay, no, thank you. Yeah. Excuse me.
Is there anything that anyone wants to say?
Excuse us.
So still not saying anything, but Paul O'Keefe right there with the hat, you know, he said that it was a big day, day number one. And day number one of the first trial, you recall, he was the first witness out the gate. There were times today when Peggy O'Keefe was wiping away tears, people were rubbing her back. I mean, it's just tough for the whole family to go through this yet again. And, you know, we couldn't even talk to any of the attorneys involved in all of this because that's another difference with this trial, right, Vinnie? Because everybody is under a gag order. So the only person that's able to speak is Karen Reed. Here's what she said at the end of day one.
I feel great. Today went well. We prepped hard, and I'm just proud of my team. I can't be prouder, and I feel fortunate to have them. And we've got the truth, so we just forge ahead.
You think you want to testify?
Jackson do?
Great as always.
Careful.
Karen, we didn't
Prepped hard. He prepped hard.
hear the words framed. Those were words used during the first trial. We didn't hear that exact language. We heard corruption. We heard deceit. Is this a different strategy?
We don't like reruns.
So remember the top of the show when you were showing Karen Reed walking with myself and the other reporters, we were swarming her and we were surrounded by all the Reed supporters. That's not allowed this time around. What the defense is doing is they have Karen Reed answer one or two questions on the courthouse steps here, and then they say no more comment, and then they walk off. It's a very different mood here at the courthouse, but again, this is just day one.
Yeah, and I understand they moved the buffer zone further away. I still was expecting a larger showing, especially like for the first day of this retrial, but we'll see how things develop there. Let's go inside the courtroom now. Let's talk about the opening statements. Again, this is a retrial, so what new information did we learn today in opening statements?
Powerful opening statements by both the defense and prosecution. Let's start with the prosecution. We had Hank Brennan, special prosecutor, really talking about Karen Reed's statement. The defendant in all of this, she's done lots of media interviews, and today the jury heard from her straight out the gate. Take a listen.
What the first witness said on the stand as testimony begins.
I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
The defense, however, focusing on the conspiracy theory and also the botched investigation, as they put it, and new evidence, including some new DNA evidence that'll be presented in the retrial. Listen to this.
And speaking of DNA, the evidence will further establish that John O'Keefe's shoe, the one that he was wearing when he was found, was sampled. And that DNA revealed 5, count them, 5 unidentified males. Recall that the evidence will establish independently that John was injured someplace warmer and had to be moved onto that lawn. 5 unidentified males touching that shoe.
So this is already playing out. The outlines, the lines in the sand are already drawn, and it's going to be a very different retrial between these two attorneys leading the charge. And it'll also be interesting, Vinnie, a big question among all of our courties especially is, will Karen Reed testify this time around? Because after all, the jury is also hearing her out-of-court statements being played throughout the trial already.
Yeah, that's way different, right? So, and the way Hank Brennan couched it, he's basically calling these statements admissions, like not confession, but admission. But if I'm a juror, I don't know if I distinguish between those two. All right, let's talk about the jury. Anything, what did you see from them as each side presented what they believe the evidence is going to show here?
Yeah, this jury is very engaged, and we didn't lose any. Some were seated almost 3 weeks ago, and then they had that long holiday weekend from when the final number of 18 was seated. We have 9 men, 9 women, very diverse. I can't tell you more than that because of court orders, but I can tell you that they're very engaged. They have notebooks, they take a lot of notes, and they pay very close attention, especially to those video clips, and especially to this defendant. During opening statements today, I noticed that they were leaning in.
He looked up at Miss Reed and he said, "What happened?" And you'll hear her words through firefighter Nuttall. She said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And it was at that time, with the words of the defendant, that she admitted what she had done that night, that she hit John O'Keefe. So why are we here today? We are here today because John O'Keefe was killed by the actions and conduct of that defendant, Karen Reed.
So the jurors are leaning forward when they're watching those clips that Hank Brennan is playing, and they're paying close attention to reaction from this defendant. And then I noticed that they were leaning back and really thinking when it was the defense's turn during their opening statements, when they were really kind of alluding to all the conspiracy that they're going to bring forward or hope to during their case in chief. But also interesting with all of this, you have a former juror who is now working with the defense. She's seated in the gallery right behind the defense team, and I noticed she is also taking notes and looking at the jurors and seeing how they're reacting to the evidence.
All right, Matt Johnson in the middle of it all. Once again, it's deja vu all over again, Matt. I'll see you up there in a couple weeks. Matt Johnson, thank you so much. Okay. All right, let's bring in our trial insiders. Criminal defense attorney Joseph Krowski Jr., longtime Massachusetts attorney, was a prosecutor for 20 years, including as homicide chief in that courthouse in Norfolk County. Rick Grundy, Karen Reed supporter, Nick Rocco, and YouTuber, author of the book Storm of Suspicion, the Karen Reed Trials, Kevin Lenahan. Great to have everyone. Okay, let me start here. Let me just go around the horn. I'm going to ask you, who won the openings today? And give me a line or two as to why. Joseph Krowski Jr. first.
The Commonwealth won because it was concise, it was easy to follow, it was supported by the data and the statements of the defendant.
Rick.
I'm going to agree with Joe. I believe the Commonwealth won, and it's kind of in comparison to what we saw in the first trial. They told a story, it was precise. You know, one of the things that was very impressive was for Brennan to be out there, and without notes, he hit every one of those times. Hours, minutes.
I got to disagree, though. It wasn't like last year. Last year, that story was all over the place. It was wasn't as focused as Brennan was. Nick, who won today?
I'm going to go with Alan Jackson, of course. I think it's going to be 3-1 here on this one. But Hank Brennan definitely did a better job than Adam Lally did relaying the story to the jury. I just find Alan Jackson's a little bit more engaging and easier to listen to.
All right, Kevin?
I'll call it a tie in the sense that they were both brilliantly written and brilliantly delivered. I would say that defense has a problem, though, and that they've created potential future credibility issues. They made a lot of claims, such as that witnesses are going to prove that John was inside the house. A whole list of claims that just aren't going to prove to be true.
All right, we'll see what the evidence shows. A couple of new things today that came out, those Karen Reed clips called admissions, and then the DNA on the shoe of John O'Keefe. What are your thoughts there? Which of those two pieces of evidence could be more powerful here, Joseph?
Well, you made the point that confessions and admissions, there's a blurred line between the two of them. Alan Jackson, and by the way, his opening I thought was very well done as well. I'm not insulting him, but he made a big point of cross-examining the paramedic Noodle. And then afterwards, Hank Brennan was able to play a clip of Karen Reed admitting she had said, I had hit him, I hit him, I hit him, to people at the scene. So I think that was probably the most powerful. DNA, there's probably source DNA from multiple sources on any article of clothing that any one of us on this show has right now on our clothing.
Nick, what do you think is going to be more powerful?
Well, definitely. I mean, I would assume the Commonwealth would want to know whose DNA is on his shoe. Also with the taillight as well, because there was 2 unidentified DNA samples on the taillight too. So I just have a feeling, you know, with both sides laying out pretty much evidence of, you know, not necessarily corruption or framing her. And same with the Hank Brennan, you know, he's talking about the cell phone being cold. He's talking about the data box from the black box. So I think both sides are going to have almost like an uphill battle here where they're going to have to provide to the jury what they're saying is true.
All right, folks. They are locked. They are loaded. They are ready. When we come back, we'll take a closer look at the opening statements. Plus, coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan investigates convicted child killer Lori Daybell on trial for the murder of her husband Charles. All the evidence is in and the arguments have been made, and it's time to hear from the jury.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan investigates tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
Does Karen Reed a killer girlfriend?
She's guilty.
Or the scapegoat in an elaborate cover-up?
Karen Reed was brave!
We know who did it.
The Karen Reed murder retrial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
You will see from the data, not just the cell phone data, but there's some other very important data. And the other piece of data that goes hand in glove with the cell phone is information on the defendant's Lexus vehicle chips. You might have heard of black box in an airplane where there's some type of event that captures a small amount of time. Well, that was captured in the defendant's Lexus. That black box information with the cell phone data will tell you everything you need to know in this case. It will bring us step by step through the entire night to the death of John O'Keefe.
Hank Brennan, in his opening statement, they're laying out what I believe, from what the way I received his opening statement, the centerpiece of his case. Digital evidence from the car, from the cell phone of John O'Keefe. Take a listen.
You will know that John O'Keefe was in that car, that Lexus, and didn't move because his healthcare data is not moving. It's not moving until 12/31/56. At 12/31/56, he begins to move. You will have 20 seconds before he falls. 20 seconds. He gets out of the car, the Lexus, and in that 20 seconds, you'll hear that user initiated. He looks at the phone, at the text message he generated. There's now 12:32:09. He closes the phone the last time. It will be the last time he uses that phone. From the waterfall bar, you see that he keeps it in his back pocket. And at that time, 12:32:09, last user, he has 7 more seconds he will move before he lies dormant the rest of the night. We'll also have the information come to the defendant's Lexus black box. Now, the clocks run differently. There's a 30-second variance, but it's right in the heart of that time. But you will see through the data at that time, when he makes his last movements with the phone, is when her car leaves 34 feet at least, stops, neutral, and then shoots into reverse with the tires spinning right towards him.
This is like the centerpiece. That's how I felt listening to that opening statement. Yet, when Alan Jackson gave his opening statement, it seemed like that was a piece that was missing from his opening statement, in directly confronting and refuting all of this evidence in the way the cell phone and the black box will tell the whole story, in the words of Hank Brennan. So let's bring back in our trial insiders. Kevin Lenahan, why was it when I was listening to Hank Brennan today, I'm hearing your voice? How many times did you tell me about the health data? What are your thoughts? Is this a centerpiece of the prosecution?
Absolutely, because I like to focus on evidence and data that's not open to interpretation. Now, Nick is probably going to say, well, why do you sometimes listen to the health app and sometimes you don't? When the health app is looking at whether or not you're going upstairs or whether or not you're water skiing or golfing, it's trying to interpret what you're doing. But in terms of whether it's started getting any information that shows movement, so this phone showed no movement from the time they pulled up until 12:31, and then it moves when he gets out of the door, and the temperature change shows us that he's getting out of the car. It's pretty bulletproof.
Rick, is this the Achilles heel for the defense if the jury latches on to this type of evidence?
Well, you notice that Hank Brennan didn't get sucked into what was done previously. And just to be clear up, I was saying that Commonwealth argument was so juxtaposed to that in the first trial that I give him the win on that. And in this situation, he didn't get sucked in to say, I'm going to go right on the defensive and tell you why you can believe all these witnesses I'm going to put up there. Because that little piece with respect to the phone and the temperature, if that comes forth as simply as he put it, and the jurors buy that, that wipes out the conspiracy theory. Because he's only outside of that car for 20 seconds. He cannot have gotten into the house. So rather than kind of taking into mind, well, this is what they're going to say, and I'm going to try and get all that in my opening, he just put something out there that if they accept, the conspiracy theory is out the window. I found it interesting.
Let me get to Nick on that, though. Nick, what does the defense do with that?
Well, I think they're going to have an expert that's going to be able to explain that. But I think the new medical examiner that they have as well is going to paint a pretty clear picture of why they believe John O'Keefe was inside the house. Now, if the temperature of his phone was dropping, it's going to have to reach a point. If it's outside for 6 hours in the morning, it's going to be colder than 55 degrees if that's the case. If it's laying on a hard, cold, frozen ground, the phone temperature would eventually be the temperature that would be outside. Yes, John's laying on top of it, but when they found John, don't forget, Nuttall said today he was cold to the touch. So that wouldn't insulate the phone anymore. So the phone is going to have to be really cold if it was outside for 6 hours.
Kevin, were you saying something?
No, just that John's body temperature was 81, and so his body heat would have kept that phone warmer.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Joseph, after I listened to that prosecution open, I'm sitting here, if I'm a juror, I'm like, I want to hear from the black box guy, and I want to hear from the cell phone guy. And that's like all I need.
So, look, it's really challenging to be a defense attorney in this day and age. Rick Grundy would have been salivating if he had access to this type of evidence when he was prosecuting cases. You've got the GPS location data from the phone. You got the event data recorder from the vehicle. You now have, that was not introduced in the last trial, the temperature of the cell phone. You have information of when that cell phone connected to Waze, when it connected to the car. And all of it lines up concisely and neatly and consistently to tell a very similar story. And to Nick's point, look, they're going to call an expert, but it's a really bad fact for them if an expert can't dispel that car pulled forward at least 35 feet, stopped, and then backed up at least 60 feet. That's an awful big coincidence for that to occur right in the specific area where John O'Keefe's body was found.
All right, let's do this. Let's take a listen now to Alan Jackson in the centerpiece of his opening statement.
So how did we end up here? How does Karen Reed end up sitting in that chair on trial for an event that literally never happened? Well, the evidence is going to explain it. And it can be summed up in the following text message at the very beginning of this investigation. A text message of a now fired Massachusetts State Police officer named Michael Proctor. He was the lead investigator on this case, and he was talking about a fellow officer, a fellow cop, who owned the property where John O'Keefe's body was found. Text message with a buddy. Question, is the homeowner gonna catch any? Answer, nope. He's a Boston cop too. You'll see from the evidence in this case that this case carries a malignancy, one that has spread through the investigation. It spread through the prosecution from the very start, from the jump. A cancer that cannot be cut out, a cancer that cannot be cured. And that cancer has a name. And his name is Michael Proctor. Now, you didn't hear his name in the prosecution's opening statement. Not once. And I suspect that was probably by design. But make no mistake about it, the evidence will show in this case that Michael Proctor is the very definition of the Commonwealth's case. And he's also their Achilles heel. He was the lead investigator on the case officer, the architect of the entire prosecution. You'll learn there's not a single part of this case, folks, not a single part that he didn't touch, that he didn't direct, that he didn't orchestrate personally. Every single bit of it has his fingerprints on it. You'll learn that Michael Proctor was a longtime family friend of the Alberts. And he's been disgraced by his own agency, not by us, by the Massachusetts State Police. Investigated, suspended, and fired. The evidence will show that Massachusetts State Police found him guilty, found Michael Proctor guilty of bringing dishonor to the department for his conduct, not in some other case, not in some tangential case. In this case, the evidence will establish that Michael Proctor himself, the lead investigator and architect of this entire case, has a long-standing and personal relationship with the Albert family. Yes, that same Albert family. His sister was close friends with Julie Albert. He personally sat at head tables at weddings, or at a head table at weddings with the Albert family. He entrusted the Alberts with babysitting his own children. You heard that correctly. And yet he was the lead detective assigned to investigate the circumstances of a Boston police officer laying dead on the Alberts' front lawn. You'll see during the trial that he intentionally lied and fabricated evidence during the course of this investigation. He lied in reports, warrants, he lied under oath. He lied about the time that he actually secured Karen Reed's vehicle. Why? Why would he lie about that? The evidence will give you the answer. He lied because he did not want it revealed that he had access to that vehicle and he had access to that taillight before any taillight fragments were found at 34 Fairview.
This jury heard a lot about Michael Proctor during the defense opening statement, but they heard nothing about Proctor during Hank Brennan's opening statement. That's like a big hole in his opening statement. Like, didn't even mention him. So let me ask you, Rick, have you ever seen a case where the lead investigator is not mentioned by the prosecutor, has been fired because of his work on the case that is at trial, and the jury comes back and says, yeah, I'm going to believe the Commonwealth beyond a reasonable doubt?
So no is the answer to your question, but obviously the important factor there is that he was fired. And I was taken aback, and what I was actually going to say earlier was you have Jackson doesn't address this phone and the temperature of it, and Hank Brennan doesn't address Proctor in any way, shape, or form. So that's a big taboo. It's always said, you know, as a prosecutor in particular, you got to get your warts out front. You got to level for your arguments. That means do the best you can to make that a plus, or at least dilute it and take it away. And the thing you want to avoid most is the jury saying, geez, you know, you really had me. I liked your opening, but you just ducked this one altogether.
Unbelievable. And Nick, after I listened to that, if I'm a juror, I want to hear from Proctor and I want to hear from Brian Albert. Like, they became the stars of the show, because at that point, like, we didn't hear anything about these people during the prosecution opening statement, and all of a sudden we're hearing all this other stuff, and it's the lead investigator, and it's the homeowner of the yard where the body was found. These are the guys I want to hear from now.
Well, I think, you know, there's no worry about Michael Proctor. We saw it in the first case. Everything Alan Jackson laid out is 100% true. What he stated about Brian Albert not coming outside, you know, he wasn't going to catch anything because he's a Boston cop. We know the facts are there. We know the text messages are there, and you know the jury's going to be looking for this stuff. And I know some people on the show before have said it's not going to be as explosive the second time, or it might not come off the same way. But who knows? Alan Jackson might not be the one to do his cross-examination. It may be a different lawyer who has a different style, so it might be received differently from the public and from the jury. But we know that the jury is going to want to see things about Brian Albert and things about Proctor, and they're going to want to see things about the black box and, what they call admissions of Karen Reed. So I think both sides just need to bring it.
Unbelievable. All right, everyone stay where you are. When we come back, let's talk about the first witness of the day. The first witness who said he heard a confession, only what he testified to this year was different than the trial last year.
When you looked up and saw that person and asked about any background, what did she say to you?
I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
How clearly do you remember her words saying to you, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him?
I remember it very distinctly.
First witness was a first responder. Second time he's testifying at trial. He testified last year. That's Timothy Nuttall, saying Karen Reed very specifically said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Take a listen to the cross-examination.
So now you do recall that last year when you testified, it was inconsistent with how you're testifying today. Let me put it that way, correct?
I believe I said I hit him twice on the stand last year.
Right. And if you're saying I hit him 3 times instead of twice, that firefighter Nuttall is inconsistent with your testimony today, correct? You agree with that?
But that is how it went that morning, though, sir.
Okay, that's not my question. Let me see if I can do it again. So I'm asking you, if you testified last year,
yes, sir,
but you heard the phrase twice, and now a year goes by and you're testifying in front of this jury this year that you heard it 3 times, those 2 statements are inconsistent with one another, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's go to the video. We have the video from last year. Here's what he said last time.
There was one individual that replied several times, I hit him, I hit him.
Okay, is it a big deal? Is it not? Let's bring back in our insiders. Joseph Krowski, what are your thoughts? Big deal? No deal? Are we going to see a lot of this because everyone has testified before?
It's a deal. I don't necessarily think it's a big deal. One of the things about Nuttall is, right, he's a first responder that has no prior relationships or connections to the Albert family or any of the other people involved. So you'd have to convince the jury that he somehow now has become part of the cover-up. Look, witnesses are imprecise. I will give credit to Attorney Jackson. He found a little opening and he sucked his teeth in it and stuck with it. And that's one of the reasons you don't like your clients to testify, because any little thing can be exploited like that. But then becomes the problem again, and that choice makes to the media. And the way this was rehabilitated by the Commonwealth was to play that clip where Karen Reed essentially acknowledged saying she had hit him at the scene.
You know, Kevin, when he said it was very particular that it was 3 times, it reminded me of Jennifer McCabe, because it always runs in my mind that she says, well, let's take a listen.
You indicated that the defendant said, I hit him, is that correct?
Yes.
That's something that she said once or more than once?
3 times. I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
Kevin, is there any magic to the saying it 3 times? Does it make it more credible, less credible?
No, and you know, in my bar owning days, I once hired a doorman who had trained for a couple of years in MMA fighting. And the problem was he had a skill that he was too eager to use now when there were situations that didn't call for it. And this is, I think, the real problem with Alan Jackson. He's extremely skilled. He should have stopped this today once he got Nuttall to admit that he had a different statement than what Michael Proctor recorded, that he said, you know, that he saw them praying at the scene or something like that. And he was adamant that he created enough doubt there. He should have stopped there. But he kept trying to hammer him. And the result is, I think, with the jury, he had just told the jury earlier that they had absolute proof that showed that John was in the house. They had witnesses. They had data. Well, if you have all that, why do you have to wordsmith to try to take apart every little part of this thing here to what is clearly a good and honest firefighter? I mean, I think it was a bad move.
Nick, your thoughts about Nuttall?
So I'd have to agree with Joe Krowski on this one, where I think it's a deal, but not a huge deal as far as how many times, whether it was 2 or 3 times. I think the bigger issue is the fact that he says his memory now is better than it was last year. And last year he said that his memory of the case was faulty. So how did last year your memory wasn't too great? Now this year it's even better, and you specifically remember, oh, she said it 3 times. So I think, like Joe said, it's a deal, not a huge deal, but the fact that his memory is better now than it was, when it first happened or in his last testimony, I think is a bigger issue, and it shows that, maybe this time it is faulty as well.
Rick, chomping at the bit. Go ahead.
I think you dig your hole deeper. This is a big thing for the Commonwealth. I think the jury believes that she said it. They're going to believe that. You got to work with that likelihood, and just having them repeat it again and again, it's only digging the hole deeper. And you know what he said? I said it. It sounded to me like the first trial, the testimony was several. Several can be 3. Maybe a little point there, but you went too far with it.
So, Joseph, what can the defense, because I spoke with the juror afterwards, and that juror was not convinced about the alleged confession. Do you think it's going to play out the same way? Will there be some definitiveness to it? Do you think the jury buys a confession?
The difference between trial number 1 and trial number 2 is the Commonwealth is now going to make use of all of the tools they have at their disposal. And one of the first things that they have that they've already used is the statements from Karen Read. And again, this isn't just a documentary. It was highlighted in the opening. There's interviews with Nightline, with 2020, with various magazines. And the problem for the defense is they all seem to corroborate the fact that these statements were uttered by Karen Read on that evening and that morning.
Nick, is there any concern that Karen Read has spoken too much outside of court? I mean, even last night, wasn't she on YouTube last night, live streaming?
Well, I believe that just shows the confidence that she has in her team and in the words that she speaks. I mean, Alan Jackson, David Yannetti, they're high-end lawyers where if they didn't think it was right, I don't think they would let her do it. Obviously now where the gag order is on the lawyer, she's the only one that can speak. She's going to keep speaking out for herself and to her supporters. And whoever's listening, they can make the judgment on if they believe she's credible or not. And I don't think she's going to get on the stand personally, but if it comes to that point where she has to defend, some of those words that she has said, then maybe she will be up there.
What a great job tonight. Great to have you guys aboard. We're just starting. We got a long way to go. Joseph Krowski Jr., Rick Grundy, Nick Rocco, Kevin Lenahan, thank you all so much. When we come back, I'll reveal, believe it or not, something else you need to know tonight. Plus, coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, Lori Daybell is a murderer. In fact, she's a mass murderer. Already convicted in 3 deaths, now facing murder charges for the shooting death of her 4th husband, Charles. Tonight, we investigate the latest in the doomsday cult killer mom case.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV.
You told police you shot him twice in the head.
I could have killed everybody in that building, and I didn't.
You think you should get some kind of credit for not killing people?
Interview with a Killer. New episode, Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
Welcome back. Time to reveal something else you need to know tonight. Let's take a look at the big board. New evidence, old theory. Scott Peterson and the LA Innocence Project say he's innocent. They filed a petition for writ of habeas corpus. It's an old theory. It's the burglars in the neighborhood saw that Lacey saw them, so they abducted her, kept her alive for a while, then killed her, and then framed the manure salesman from Modesto, Scott Peterson, for murder, double murder. And part of the new evidence that they're alleging is evidence related to the expert talking about the age of baby Connor. saying that baby Connor could not have been killed on Christmas Eve and had to have been killed about a week later based upon this expert analysis. Anyhow, we'll keep an eye on it. In the meantime, please keep an eye on this missing child. This is Quianonnii Nickhol-Ja Tendell, missing out of Denver, Colorado. Make the call, make a difference. Let's see if we can get her home. I'm Vinnie Politan. We got another hour live true crime. In the meantime, please don't forget to hug the kids.